Before we begin, subscribe so you never miss another sleepless night. Now, let's begin. I never thought much about how easily a person could vanish on a job like this. Food delivery seemed so mundane, so safe. You'd drive, you'd drop off the order, you'd get paid, and that was it. A simple transaction, a quick exchange. But that night, everything changed. That night taught me the profound difference between the abstract knowledge that something bad could happen and the chilling visceral sensation of feeling its icy breath on the back of your neck. My name is Ethan Wells. I grew up in Glenhurst, a mid-sized town in upstate New York, where the winters are so cold they feel like they're chewing through your bones, and the summers smell faintly of rain on hot asphalt. That September, at 27 years old, I was living alone in a cramped one-bedroom apartment situated above a perpetually busy laundromat on Grove Street. The place had a constant, low hum of machinery and smelled faintly of dryer sheets and stale mildew, a scent that had become the background music of my life. But it was cheap and conveniently located near everything that mattered. A grocery store for my meager provisions, a gas station for my old sedan, and the only bar in town worth walking into. Before taking on this late-night delivery gig, I had spent 4 years working as a front desk assistant at a small independent coffee shop on Maple Avenue. I liked the quiet, predictable rhythm of that life, the low hum of the printers, the gentle clatter of cups, the feeling of being useful. Even if that usefulness was mostly limited to stapling insurance packets or scanning client tax forms, it was a secure, if unexciting, existence. That ended abruptly last winter when the owner decided to retire and sold the building to some anonymous, faceless accounting firm from Albany. They came in with a cold efficiency, didn't keep any of the staff, and I found myself out on the street with a severance check that was rapidly dwindling. I thought I'd find another office job quickly. I had a decent resume and a good work ethic, but the openings just weren't there. And with rent deadlines looming, I swallowed my pride, downloaded the Quick Eats app, and hoped that this delivery work would be a very temporary solution. The weird, nocturnal hours didn't bother me. In fact, they suited me perfectly. I've always been a night owl, more comfortable on empty streets with the low rumble of my car's engine than in the chaotic rush of daytime traffic. My mom used to joke that I was born on the wrong side of the clock, that in another life I would have been a solitary lighthouse keeper or a late-night radio host, speaking into the void. That night was particularly still and cool. The air already carried the crisp, leafy promise of an early autumn. I had been working since 7, and by midnight, the orders had slowed to a trickle. I had parked in my usual spot behind the Healthy Heart vitamin shop and was mindlessly scrolling through my phone, the soft strains of my favorite playlist, a low hum from the speakers. At 12:32 am, my phone buzzed with the vibration of a new order. It was from Mamma Mia's Pizzeria on Castle Road, a place I knew well. The instructions were simple. Pick up now, deliver in 15 minutes. I didn't even check the customer's name, just hit accept with the thought of easy money. The pickup was, as usual, a non-event. The night shift crew at the pizzeria knew me by now, and we exchanged a few tired pleasantries. They handed me a single large pizza box. The receipt had no special instructions, just the simple phrase, "Deliver hot, easy money." The GPS route took me west, guiding me onto the old Stonehouse Parkway, where the streetlights were few and far between, casting long, eerie shadows across the asphalt. I was humming along to my music, tapping the steering wheel in time with the beat, when the app's synthetic voice told me to turn down a side road I'd never been on before, Appleton Drive. At first, it looked like any other industrial park road. White lanes, imposing power lines overhead, and a faint, lingering smell of industry. But the farther I went, the clearer it became that this was not a neat, bustling business park. The buildings were old, their paint peeling, with faded signs I couldn't make out in the gloom. Weeds pushed their way determinedly through cracks in the sidewalks. The streetlights here were dim, some flickering as if on their last breath. I slowed down, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. I was half expecting a security guard to pop out of nowhere, but the place was utterly deserted. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating parking lots littered with fallen leaves, a few abandoned shopping carts, and random pieces of office furniture piled by a loading dock. The GPS chirped again. In 100 feet, turn left. I turned into a small, uneven lot behind a one-story brick building. The asphalt was cracked and pockmarked, as if it hadn't been paved in decades. The building itself had no signs, no windows, just solid brick walls and a few unmarked gray metal doors. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text message. Customer: "Yeah, I see you. Come to the gray metal door on the left." I looked around. Sure enough, there was one door that fit the description perfectly. Plain, gray, no windows, no signs. Just a simple handle glinting faintly in the light of the nearest street lamp. I grabbed the pizza box and stepped out into the still heavy silence of the night. The gravel crunched loudly under my sneakers. As I got closer to the door, another message came through. Customer: "You can just bring it inside." I hesitated. Company policy explicitly discouraged going inside a customer's home or business, but I knew that a lot of late-night clients would ask for it. It was usually office workers or security guards who just wanted the food brought right to their desk. I tried the handle. The door swung open with a light, metallic squeak that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Inside was a narrow, claustrophobic hallway, lit only by a few dim, sickly yellow overhead bulbs. The air was stale, thick with the metallic tang of old pipes, maybe rust. I took a few tentative steps inside, expecting to see a front desk or at least a lobby, but the hallway stretched on, disappearing into the darkness. No voices, no sounds. And then I heard it. A soft, final click. The sound came from behind me. I spun around. The gray metal door was closed. I tried the handle. It didn't budge. It was locked. "Hey, anyone in here?" My voice was a weak, trembling echo that bounced off the walls. No reply. A small, cold knot of fear settled deep in my stomach. I pounded on the door. "Hey, I think you locked me in." Nothing. I looked down the hallway, my pulse hammering in my ears. The pizza box I still clutched in my hand felt absurdly heavy, a ridiculous anchor in this surreal situation. I put it on the floor, the paper rustling loudly against the grimy tile. From somewhere up ahead, I heard the deliberate creak of a door opening. Slow, measured, then the quiet sound of it closing. Someone was definitely here. I moved quickly, forcing myself to be as quiet as possible, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The hallway ended in another door, which led to a second, longer hall, lined with small dark offices. Each doorway was a yawning, black rectangle. Some had their blinds closed, while others revealed a terrifying, empty darkness inside. From the far end of the hallway came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, quick, purposeful, and getting closer with every step. I ducked into the nearest office, crouching low and flat behind a dust-covered desk. My nose was filled with a musty smell of dust and old paper. I felt like my breathing was impossibly loud, a roaring sound in my own ears. The footsteps reached the spot where I had just been and stopped. Silence. Then a faint shuffling sound, as if someone was shifting their weight, turning in the stillness. Then the footsteps started again, heading back the other way. I waited, forcing myself to count to 60, my body tense and rigid. Then I slipped out, moving the opposite direction, toward the flickering light at the end of the hall. The hallway curved, leading to a set of double doors with a buzzing, flashing exit sign above them. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I pushed them open. The cold night air hit my face like a physical slap. I bolted across the parking lot to my car, fumbling frantically with the lock, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would tear through my chest. Once inside, I locked the doors and started the engine, peeling out of the lot as fast as my old sedan could go. My phone buzzed wildly in the cup holder. Another message from the customer. I didn't even look at it. Once I was on the main road, I called 911, my voice a shaking, breathless mess as I explained what had happened. The dispatcher, a calm voice on the other end, told me to find a safe place and not to engage with him further. I grabbed my phone charger, ran into the bathroom, and locked the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the tub, my heart pounding so hard I could feel the vibrations through the porcelain. I could hear my own breathing louder than anything else. I strained my ears, trying to catch any sound from outside. A footstep, a creak of the front door, the sound of breaking glass. But all I could hear was the low hum of the bathroom fan. The minutes stretched on like hours. Every creak in the house suddenly seemed suspicious. Every gentle rustle of leaves outside a potential threat. Finally, through the frosted bathroom window, I saw the beautiful, life-saving flicker of red and blue lights. I waited until I heard a police officer's voice calling my name before I unlatched the door and walked out. When I told them everything, the delivery, the strange knock, the phone calls, they took my statement down carefully, their faces grim. The good news, they said, was that he was gone by the time they arrived. The even better news was that I had given them his name from the receipt, his description, and the phone number he had called from. They said they'd find him. I haven't seen or heard from Caleb since, but the experience left a permanent scar. Now, every time I order delivery, I double-check my locks before I even eat a single bite of food. I never thought I'd be back to delivering after college. Back then, I did it for a few months to make ends meet, and I swore to myself that I would never again deal with the stress and the late nights. But by last fall, my life had gone off script. The marketing firm where I worked had cut my hours in half after losing a major client, and the rent in my city was only going up. I tried everything to make up the difference. Bartending shifts, tutoring, even selling some of my old video games and records, but it wasn't enough. So at the end of October, I reluctantly gave in and took a part-time delivery job at the Creekside Pizza joint on the outskirts of Pine Creek, Oregon. The place was a local, family-owned business. The tips on weekends were decent, and the owner, a kind, good-natured man named Mr. Kravitz, was easygoing as long as you didn't wreck the company car. By the first week of December, I had fallen back into the familiar, predictable rhythm of it. 5 nights a week, I'd clock in at 6 p.m., drive pizzas all over town, and be done by 11 or midnight. It was a monotonous job, but it had its perks. I got to listen to my own music in the car, and sometimes a grateful customer would give you a massive tip just for showing up in bad weather. That night, a Friday, December 8th, started out like any other. I got to the shop around 5:50, said a tired hello to Kayla at the register, grabbed a slice of pepperoni for myself, and checked the order board. The air outside was cold and damp, a heavy kind of air that always precedes a deep freeze. By 9 p.m., the orders had died down so much that I was feeling hopeful I could leave early. I was sitting in my car, scrolling through my phone, when Kayla's voice crackled over the two-way radio. It was about 10, 40 when she called me over. "Hey Ryan, want to take one last one? It's a little remote." "How remote?" I asked, my interest piqued by the prospect of an easy delivery. "Out of town. The address says it's a cabin on Millbrook Lane. It's paid for online. Tip is included." I leaned in closer. "How big of a tip?" I asked. $18, she said with a grin. That was more than enough for me to grab the thermal bag without a second thought. I glanced at the printed receipt. The customer's name was E. March, and the address was one I had never seen before. My GPS showed it was a 20-minute drive north into the foothills, past the last of the houses. I had only been out that way a couple of times, and only in the daytime. By 11:00, I was driving down Highway 19, the heater blasting on full to keep the cold at bay. The road got narrower the farther I went, the towering pine trees closing in around me like the walls of a dark tunnel. The only light was from my high beams and the rare reflective road sign that seemed to flash a desperate warning. The signal on my phone kept blinking between a weak 2 bars and no service at all. When the GPS told me to turn right, I found myself on a narrow, unpaved gravel road dotted with old, crumbling wooden lampposts. Each one held a single, dim, flickering yellow bulb that was only bright enough to show the immediate curve of the road ahead. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of my tires on the gravel. About a quarter of a mile in, the gravel road ended abruptly in a clearing. I stopped my car and saw a weathered wooden sign that said, "Millbrook Retreat Complex. Welcome." Below it were 5 smaller signs, each pointing down a separate dark trail. The printed receipt said, "Cabin 4. I parked beside an empty wooden bench and got out into the biting cold. The air smelled of wet pine and a distant, smoky campfire, though I didn't see any lit chimneys. The trails were wide enough for one person, with my car nowhere near fitting. They were lit by small, waist-high lamps, but the light only stretched a few feet. In between each lamp was a stretch of almost complete darkness. Balancing the pizza bag in one hand, I started down the trail for number 4. The crunch of the gravel under my boots sounded impossibly loud, echoing slightly in the heavy, still air. For the first minute or so, I passed only trees. Then, off to my left, I could see the faint outlines of the other cabins through the branches. They were all dark, with no signs of life. I checked my phone again. Still no service. I told myself it was fine. It was probably just a weekend rental cabin. And this person, E. March, was probably some tech guru trying to escape the city for a few days. Maybe he'd even give me a bigger tip. About 3 minutes in, I saw it. The cabin was small and single-story, sitting in a small clearing with a thin layer of frost on the roof. One window faced the trail, but it was a black, empty rectangle. I walked up to the small porch and knocked on the door. The sound, hollow and sharp, seemed to hang in the air for an eternity. No one answered. I knocked again, louder this time. "Pizza delivery!" I called out. Silence. I took out my phone to call the number on the order. It rang 6 times before the call suddenly cut out on its own. A second later, I got a text message from the same number. "Hey, sorry, not there right now. The door's unlocked. Just leave it on the table inside. Thanks." Something about that text made my stomach clench with an immediate, irrational sense of dread. Weird, I muttered to myself. But it was late, and I didn't want to walk all the way back to my car with the food, only to have to deal with a complaint later. I tried the handle. It turned easily. The inside smelled of stale, damp air. There was no light, but the faint glow from the trail lamp was just strong enough to show a small wooden table in the center of the room. "Hey, anyone in here?" I called out, my voice a little shaky. No one replied. I stepped in, setting the bag down and unzipping it when I heard it. A single sharp creak from the back of the cabin. My head snapped toward the far corner, where a closed door stood. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The door slowly, deliberately opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, in his late 40s, with a thick beard and a heavy flannel shirt. But it wasn't just that he appeared. It was the way he moved quickly, purposefully, directly toward me. "Hey, thanks for bringing that in. Here's your tip," he said, his voice a low rumble. No problem. It was already," I replied, my voice a strained whisper. He kept walking, faster now, his eyes locked on mine with an unblinking intensity that made my skin crawl. I was backing toward the door, my throat tightening with panic. I should probably get going. He lunged. I stumbled backward, almost falling off the porch step, and crashed right into someone else. The second man was shorter, in a dark hoodie. He went flying backward into the frost-covered grass with a loud grunt while I recovered my balance and bolted down the trail. Footsteps thundered behind me, not just one pair, but two. I didn't dare look back until I passed the next lamp. When I glanced behind me, they weren't in the light, but just dark silhouettes moving with a terrifying speed in the darkness between the posts. I ran even faster, my lungs burning, until the clearing came into view. My car was still there. I jumped in, started the engine, and sped down the gravel road. I didn't stop until I was back in town, where my phone had a full signal again. I called 911, explaining everything between shaky breaths. When the police got there, they found the cabin empty. The front door was locked, but there were no signs of the men, and no sign of a break-in, which made sense because the place wasn't even rented out. The payment was made with a prepaid Visa card, and the phone number was for an untraceable, unregistered VIP communication service. I've thought about that night a lot. They knew I'd have to walk in alone. They had it all planned. But what scares me even more is the second man. Was he waiting outside the whole time, watching me walk down that trail, a silent predator in the darkness? And if he had gotten up a second faster, if he hadn't been so surprised, I'm not sure I'd be here to tell this story. I never truly considered how much implicit trust we place in strangers until that night. I was 26 at the time, living alone in a small rental house on the outskirts of Milford, South Carolina. It was one of those neighborhoods where the yards were small, the streetlights were dim and flickering, and most of the houses had been built back in the 70s. It wasn't the worst place to live, but it definitely wasn't the kind of place where you could feel comfortable leaving your door unlocked. I had been living there for about a year, having moved in after a particularly messy breakup, just trying to get my life back on a stable track. On weekdays, I worked as a receptionist at a local dental clinic. The job was nothing special, but it paid the bills, and the routine was a comforting constant. My social life, well, let's just say it wasn't very busy. Most nights after work, I'd come home, kick off my shoes, get into my most comfortable pajama pants, and put on something mindless on TV while I scrolled through my phone. That Friday evening was no different from the rest, except for one small detail. I didn't feel like cooking. It had been an exceptionally long day. I had spent hours dealing with a stream of cranky patients and a dentist who was even crankier. All I wanted was some simple, comforting food. So, around 7 p.m., I pulled out my phone and ordered a pepperoni pizza from a small local joint called Tony's. I didn't order from them often. Usually, I'd use the big delivery services like Grubhub or Uber Eats. But Tony's had this crust that tasted like it was brushed with garlic butter and a sprinkle of magic. The guy showed up about 15 minutes later which was surprisingly fast. When I opened the door, I saw a short man, maybe 35, with long, stringy, dark hair that looked like it hadn't seen shampoo in a while. He had on a faded red Tony's polo shirt and a black delivery bag slung across his shoulder. His name tag, which looked worn and faded, said Caleb, though the name didn't ring any bells. "Large pepperoni with extra cheese?" he asked, his voice flat and monotone. "That's me," I said, handing him the money. He passed me the pizza and my change without much conversation, but he lingered for a second longer than he should have, his eyes subtly scanning me with a glance that felt less than casual. It was quick, though, so I didn't think much of it at the time. "Have a good evening," I said, forcing a polite smile. "You too," he replied, almost robotically, before turning and walking back to an old, beat-up blue sedan at the curb. Nothing about the moment screamed danger. If anything, it was a painfully normal, forgettable interaction. I went back inside, put the pizza on the coffee table, and settled in for a night of greasy food and the comfortable background noise from the TV. Hours passed. The sun had long since set, and a soft, misty rain had begun to fall outside. I had eaten a few too many slices, exchanged some late-night texts with my sister, and was starting to yawn around 11 p.m. I was just about to get ready for bed when there was a sudden, sharp knock on my front door. I froze, not from fear at first, but from sheer confusion. No one never knocks on my door this late. I don't have friends who stop by unannounced, and I certainly wasn't expecting a package. I walked into the living room and, instead of opening the door, I peeked out the window between the blinds. My heart dropped. It was Caleb, the delivery guy. But he wasn't in his Tony's shirt anymore. He had on a dark black jacket and jeans, and he was standing under my porch light, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. I stared at him for maybe 3 seconds, a frozen moment in time, before he raised his head and looked directly at me through the glass. The shock of being caught made me instinctively jump back. My heart began to pound like a heavy bass drum, its frantic rhythm shaking my entire chest. He knocked again, harder this time. I stood perfectly still in the darkness, barely breathing. There was something about his presence, the way he was just standing there as if he had every right to be on my porch, that felt profoundly and fundamentally wrong. I decided to keep the door locked and talk to him through my living room window. It was one of those old windows with a sliding frame and just a flimsy screen between me and the outside. I unlatched it, slid it up a little, and called out, "What's wrong? Did I forget to give you something?" He didn't answer. He just turned his body to face me and started walking slowly across the porch toward the window. My pulse leaped into my throat. I slammed the window shut before he got close and locked it tight. He stopped about 5 feet from the glass and made a small, slow motion with his hand, like he was beckoning for me to open it again. His expression was flat, unreadable, and it was more terrifying than if he had been shouting. "No," I said firmly, shaking my head. For a few long seconds, he just stood there, motionless, like a statue carved from shadow. Then, without a single word, he turned and walked off my porch, disappearing down the road. I let out a shaky breath of relief, but it didn't last long. I walked into my bedroom, thinking that the bizarre encounter was over, but my phone on the nightstand suddenly rang. It was an unknown number. I didn't answer, but a voicemail notification popped up right away. I hit play with a trembling finger. The voice was low, deliberate, and male. It was unmistakably his. "I'm outside," he said. "If you don't let me in, I'm coming in." The words were like a bucket of ice water dumped down my spine. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I dialed the number. He answered instantly. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling and thin. "Let me in," he said, his voice as flat as before. "Why?" I asked, my mind racing. "Just do it." And then he hung up. That was all the confirmation I needed. I called 911, explaining what was happening in a rushed, frantic whisper. The dispatcher, a calm voice on the other end, told me to find a safe place and not to engage with him further. I grabbed my phone charger, ran into the bathroom, and locked the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the tub, my heart pounding so hard I could feel the vibrations through the porcelain. I could hear my own breathing louder than anything else. I strained my ears, trying to catch any sound from outside. A footstep, a creak of the front door, the sound of breaking glass. But all I could hear was the low hum of the bathroom fan. The minutes stretched on like hours. Every creak in the house suddenly seemed suspicious, every gentle rustle of leaves outside a potential threat. Finally, through the frosted bathroom window, I saw the beautiful, life-saving flicker of red and blue lights. I waited until I heard a police officer's voice calling my name before I unlatched the door and walked out. When I told them everything, the delivery, the strange knock, the phone calls, they took my statement down carefully, their faces grim. The good news, they said, was that he was gone by the time they arrived. The even better news was that I had given them his name from the receipt, his description, and the phone number he had called from. They said they'd find him. I haven't seen or heard from Caleb since, but the experience left a permanent scar. Now, every time I ordered delivery, I double-check my locks before I even eat a single bite of food. The night air was cold and heavy, a thick blanket of darkness that seemed to swallow the light from the streetlights. At 22, I was just a college student, trying to make some extra cash on the side by delivering food. It wasn't my main career path, but the extra money always helped, especially with student loans looming. My work schedule was flexible, so I could take orders whenever I wanted, and I'd usually be out for a couple of hours, earning enough to cover my basic needs. That night, I was just about to call it quits when a new order came in. A large amount, a good restaurant, and the promise of a big tip. I accepted it without a second thought. When I arrived at the restaurant, the owner greeted me with a solemn look and warned me that the order was large and heavy, and that I should be careful on the way. The address was one I didn't recognize, in the furthest corner of the city. I drove. The first 10 minutes were familiar streets and bright lights, but the farther I drove, the fewer the streetlights became, and soon I was driving on a narrow, unpaved road surrounded by a dense, silent forest. My GPS kept telling me to go straight, but the road began to wind, dropping into lowlands where a thick, white fog hung over the asphalt like a ghostly presence. I finally got to what seemed like a residential area, but it wasn't quite. The houses were far apart, each with a long, lonely driveway. Some were brightly lit, their windows glowing with warmth, while others were completely dark, silent, and ominous. My GPS showed that I had about half a mile left to go. Then the road narrowed, turning into a dead end. I slowed down, double-checking the address. The map had a dot right ahead, but when my headlights illuminated the end of the road, I saw something strange. A small wooden gate with peeling white paint and a number sign nailed to it. The number matched the order. What confused me was that none of the other houses in the area had gates, and there was no mailbox in sight. Just the gate, and behind it, a gravel road that disappeared into the dark woods. I got out of my car, the cold air biting at my skin, to open it. The gate had no latch, just a thick rope loosely wrapped around the post. When I untied it and pushed the gate open, the hinges squealed so loudly it sounded like a dying animal, and the hair on my arms stood on end. I reminded myself that people out here like their privacy, There was nothing weird about a gate. Getting back in my car, I rolled slowly down the gravel road. My headlights cut through the darkness, picking out wet branches hanging low over the trail. I went maybe 60 yards before the trees opened up, and I saw the house. It was old, not in a charming rustic way, but more like it was abandoned and forgotten. The siding was gray and weathered, the paint long gone. The front steps were slightly tilted, a broken-toothed smile. The house was smaller than the other homes I had passed, maybe a single story with a loft, and it was absolutely dark. No light on the porch, no glow from inside. Yet, the front door was wide open, a yawning mouth in the gloom. The note on the order had even said, "Leave it on the porch if no one answers." Balancing the heavy bags, I made my way to the steps. My boots crunched loudly on the gravel, and I could have sworn it was so quiet that the sound echoed back at me. My car headlights were the only source of light, a fragile beacon illuminating the yard and the open doorway. I was about to set the bags down when a voice came from inside. "Hey, pal, just bring it in here." It was a man's voice, not loud, but casual, as if he was just upstairs and didn't want to come down. I froze for a half second, my heart pounding in my chest. The layout of the house was simple. The front door opened right into a small living room, and to the left was a staircase that went up into a total blackness. I couldn't see the top of it, but that's where the voice had come from. I hesitated, shifting the weight of the bags, a strange sense of unease washing over me. Yeah, sure. I took a tentative step inside. The wooden floorboard creaked loudly under me. My eyes adjusted enough to make out the railing of the staircase. "Is this everything?" I asked. No one replied. I felt something clench in my chest, a tight knot of fear. I needed to get out. I turned to leave, but then the door behind me slammed shut with a thunderous bang. I jumped, dropping the food bags, which landed on the floor with a loud thud. I turned and grabbed the handle. It didn't budge. It was locked. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice a strangled shout. "What's going on?" There was no sound from upstairs. I looked at the staircase. The shadows from my headlights, pushing through the doorway, seemed long and distorted, casting monstrous outlines on the walls. I heard a quiet sound from upstairs, a shuffling sound. It was slow, hesitant, as if someone was moving around barefoot. "Hey!" I yelled again. "I need to go! You locked me in!" I started shaking the door, the flimsy handle rattling uselessly. The unfamiliar sound from upstairs got faster. 2 shuffling sounds, then 3. They were coming down the stairs. I couldn't see who or what it was, but I knew they were getting closer. I grabbed something from the floor, a small but heavy wooden vase, and got ready to defend myself. I heard them descending the steps, each step becoming louder and louder. When they were about halfway down, I could finally make them out in the darkness. There were 2 of them. One was tall, the other shorter, and they moved in a strange jerking way, their bodies twisting and contorting. I couldn't make out their faces. They were just dark, faceless silhouettes. I bolted for the window. It was old, but I was able to push it open with all my strength. I scrambled through, jumping out, and landed on the damp grass. I ran to my car, not looking back. I could hear their guttural cries and the thudding of their footsteps as they burst out of the house, chasing after me. I jumped in my car, started the engine, and sped away. I didn't look in my mirrors until I was miles away, on a lit-up highway. I called the police and explained everything. When they arrived at the scene, the house was empty. The door was locked, but on the floor, they found strange signs. Shoe prints that shouldn't have been there. I never found out who they were or what they wanted. But that night taught me not to trust even the most ordinary of orders. I never used to worry about late-night deliveries, but that changed last spring. It was a Saturday, and I was trying to earn some extra money for a trip. I was a student at the time, and I had been working at a local pizza shop for about 2 months. It was a small, family-owned place called the Pizza Box, and it was one of the few places in town that delivered until 2 a.m. The night was cold and damp, and I was the only one on the delivery shift. It was around 1 a.m. when I got the last order of the night. It was from a customer named Mark Peterson, and the address was on the far edge of town. It was a 20-minute drive, but the pay was good, and the tip was high. The order said to deliver to the back door and be quiet. I drove to the address, which was a large 2-story house with a sprawling yard. It was completely dark, with no lights on, inside or out. I parked my car, grabbed the pizza, and walked to the back door, which was a sliding glass door. I knocked quietly and waited. No one answered. I knocked again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. I checked the order note again. Just open the door and leave it inside. It said, "Don't ring the doorbell." I was hesitant, but it was late, and I didn't want to get a bad review. I tried the handle, and it was unlocked. I slid the door open just enough to put the pizza inside when I saw him. A man was standing in the darkness, a few feet away from me. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, and his face was completely shadowed. I froze. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me. "Sorry," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I didn't hear you." He didn't reply. He just took a step closer. My blood ran cold. I slammed the door shut and ran. I didn't look back until I was in my car, speeding away. I called the police from the road, but when they got to the house, no one was there. They told me to be more careful in the future, but they didn't have any answers for me. I never worked for the Pizza Box again. To this day, I still have no idea who that man was or what he wanted. I've always loved quiet places, the silence of a forest, the stillness of a lake. That's why I took a job as a house sitter on the outskirts of town. The house was beautiful, with a huge yard and a pond in the back. The owners were a wealthy couple who were going on a 2-week vacation. All I had to do was water the plants and feed the cat. The cat, a grumpy old tabby named Mittens, was the only one for company. The first few days were peaceful. I spent my time reading, watching movies, and enjoying the silence. On the 3rd night, I was watching a movie in the living room when I heard a faint scratching sound from the back door. I froze. Mittens, who had been sleeping on the couch next to me, suddenly sat up, her ears twitching. The scratching sound got louder, more frantic. I grabbed my phone and crept to the back door, which was a sliding glass door. I peeked through the blinds and saw a man standing on the patio, scratching at the glass. He was wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap, and he had a knife in his hand. My heart leaped into my throat. He saw me, and his eyes widened. He started rattling the door, trying to get in. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a phone, but my hands were shaking so much I could barely dial. I finally got through to 911, and they told me to lock myself in the bathroom and wait. I did as they said, and I sat there in the dark, listening to the sounds of him trying to get in. He was trying the windows, the front door, everything. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a few minutes. I finally heard the sirens in the distance, and the sounds of him trying to get in stopped. The police found him in the woods behind the house. They said he was a local man with a history of breaking and entering. He had been released from prison just a few months earlier. I was grateful to be safe, but the experience left me shaken. I never took another house-sitting job again. I've always been a person who loves to drive. The open road, the feeling of freedom. That's why I took a job as a long-haul truck driver. It was a solitary job, but I liked it that way. I was my own boss, and I got to see the country. The job had its downsides, though. The long hours, the loneliness, the strange things you see on the road. On one of my trips, I was driving through a desolate stretch of highway in the middle of the night. There were no cars on the road, no streetlights, just me and my truck. It was around 3 a.m., and I was starting to get tired. I decided to pull over at a rest stop to get some coffee. The rest stop was empty. No other cars, no people, just me. The building was old and looked like it hadn't been used in years. The lights were flickering, and the air was thick with a strange smell. I went inside and got a cup of coffee from the vending machine. As I was walking back to my truck, I saw a woman standing by a tree a few feet away from me. She was wearing a long white dress, and her hair was long and black. Her back was to me. I thought she was a ghost at first, but then she turned around. Her face was pale, and her eyes were empty. She smiled at me, a wide, unnatural smile. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. She took a step closer, and then another. I dropped my coffee cup and ran to my truck. I jumped in, started the engine, and sped away. I didn't look in my mirrors until I was miles away. I never saw her again, but the memory of her face haunts me to this day. I'm not a religious man, but I pray every night that I never see her again. It was a cold, rainy night. I was a college student, and I was home for the weekend. My parents were out of town, so I had the house to myself. I decided to have some friends over to watch a movie. We ordered a pizza and settled in for the night. It was around 11 p.m. when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw the pizza guy standing there. He was a tall, lanky kid with a crooked smile. I paid him for the pizza, and he gave me my change. He didn't leave right away, though. He just stood there, staring at me with a strange look in his eyes. "Can I help you with something?" I asked. "Nope," he said. "Just checking if everything's good." He finally left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We went back to watching the movie, but I couldn't focus. I kept looking at the windows, at the shadows in the yard. About 20 minutes later, I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving outside the living room window. "Did you see that?" I asked my friend. He looked at me, his eyes wide. "Yeah, someone just walked by." We rushed to the window. The yard was empty, but whoever it was had disappeared around the corner. "This isn't funny anymore," my friend muttered. Just then, we heard the faint sound of the sliding glass door handle rattling from the back. The lock clicked, but someone was definitely trying to get in. My pulse hammered. We crept toward the kitchen, peeking into the patio area. At first, it looked empty. Then, I flicked on the patio light. For a split second, I saw him. A man in a dark hooded jacket, his face mostly shadowed, frozen mid-step. His head jerked toward us, and then he bolted, splashing through puddles toward the back fence. "Call the cops," I hissed. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. They searched the yard, the street, even knocked on a few neighbors' doors, but found nothing. They told us to keep everything locked and call again if we saw anything. My parents got home 15 minutes later. My friend and I told them everything. None of us slept much that night. Every creak of the house set me on edge. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what he wanted. But every time I order pizza now, I still check the bushes before I open the door.